Hello, everybody, and welcome to the first emergency episode of Guardia Di Medicina. What Dr. Fossaceca and I have decided to do is that we're going to intermittently provide emergency episodes where big things happen in the news that directly affect healthcare. And we're very excited today because we're going to be talking about the most recent New York City mayor election that was finalized this past Tuesday. Zoran Mamdani was elected mayor, and we're going to be reacting to his current healthcare policies, especially since he's such a very powerful political figure.
So I want to talk a lot about this, and I think that it's very telling that we're sitting here in Youngstown, Ohio, and we're talking about this. The mayor-elect of New York City.
Absolutely. And, I don't even know who the governor of New York City is, but I know who this guy is because it's been talked about in the news. And I think he's got a 94% favorability coverage from big media, so they clearly like him. So I find it very intriguing.
I didn't know that about big media. That's very interesting.
Yeah, and in fact, there's a stat out that Donald Trump gets close to 87% negative coverage. I think Joe Biden got close to 67% negative coverage when he was elected president after, of course, during his campaign times, it was always very positive. But after he was elected, he got very negative coverage. This gentleman has had 95% positive coverage, but now we'll see what happens after he's elected. They seem to always turn on him.
Well, I mean, it's very telling, though, because he self-identifies as a Democratic Socialist. And I know that word, the socialist word, scares a lot of people. I understand why, but it's very telling that this guy really came out of nowhere, built a campaign from the ground up, identifies as a Democratic Socialist, and has won New York City over, and apparently has won the media over, from what you're telling me.
And I am very impressed with some of the things he said so far. And I'm very impressed with his way to diagnose certain problems. What I'm not impressed with is some of his solutions. But the most exciting thing is when you look into his financial backgrounds, when we talk about his donors, this was mainly a grassroots campaign. Now, there is that one lawsuit. I don't want to call it a lawsuit. We're going to speak, but there is that one concern that he broke campaign rules and accepted foreign financial money. That is still investigation, I believe, is ongoing, but that is just a small part of what he raised overall from all of the New York City constituents. And from my understanding, there were no major players in terms of the traditional Democratic backing from the big money players.
So from what I saw, his largest political donation was $2,100. An average donation across the board was about $80. So that tells me that these are people. These aren't corporations.
And that's amazing. That's exactly what we want. That's somebody that, if they have no obligation to the big money players, what are we referring to? The same people that tie into the major investments in BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, your George Soros of the world. He's the number one Democratic donator. That's huge if you don't have any political alignment to those. And then also, it's also huge, it's been a hot button topic, AIPAC, the pro-Israeli fund that connects Israel and America. If you don't have any connections to that as well, you have only loyalty to the United States, so I think is by far and away the most important thing for a politician, just to start.
So I also wanted to highlight here that, not only did Mamdani not accept money from giant donors, but some of the giant donors directly paid his opponents. So he went up against something like $22 million worth of billionaire money that were donated to his direct opponents, really, which is telling to me, especially because you look at the Democratic Party, Andrew Cuomo is a Democrat. Mamdani won the primary. They still slapped Cuomo as an independent to run against him.
Easy to think about.
So because the Democratic Party is fractioned, in my opinion, into like two separate sides. Obviously, there's a spectrum, but a lot of people feel the Democratic Party has abandoned them, a lot of people on the left, and they've started to tell them what they should be upset about rather than listening to people and hearing actually what people are upset about. And I think that's why Mamdani resonated so well with the people, is he literally went around the communities that he grew up in, asking these people, what's the number one issue? Like, what's on your mind? What affects your life in a day-to-day way? What are we talking about here?
What is the number one issue in your opinion?
So it's from his perspective, because, he's the mayor. He's not going to be able to enact giant healthcare reform on a federal level. Cost of living. There's a cost of living crisis that people can't afford to live in New York City. Groceries, rent, on top of healthcare, people literally can't afford to live in the city anymore. And then there are things that are in place like rent stabilization that you can qualify for to live in some of these places in New York City. But a lot of those rent stabilization programs have kind of been changed over the last few years. Mamdani wants to kind of nip that in the bud. And, there's only so much money to go around here. People aren't receiving 5-10% raises all the time.
Probably not receiving any raises. We're going to get to healthcare here in just a few minutes, but talking specifically in regards to the cost of living issue, one of my concerns is that the money has to come from somewhere. And I read a stat that 50% of New York City's taxpayer dollars come from the top 1%. So if Mamdani's policies don't benefit the top 1%, what's going to prevent them from leaving?
So leave. New York City is the financial capital of the world. So leave. I understand what you're saying, but I also got some numbers here. So New York City taxes, you pay the same rate whether you make $50,000 a year or $5 million a year. It's a flat tax, period. Their corporate tax rate of their state, it's the lowest of all their neighboring states. New Jersey, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, Vermont, Rhode Island, New Hampshire. New York has the lowest corporate tax rate.
I find that interesting. So you're saying even if somebody makes $5 million versus somebody that makes $50,000, they're going to pay the same amount of city tax rate?
They pay a flat city tax, yes.
That is interesting. So
Yes.
do you know how much that tax rate is?
I do. Give me 1 second to dig it up here. So here, city income tax is a flat 3.9% for all taxpayers.
Understood. And just emphasize though, 3.9% of 5 million is much different than 3.9% of 5,000.
Absolutely.
And so my concern is that I understand some of the policies that he wants to put in, which I'm going to let you expand upon here in a second, but that's going to take everybody's buy-in. And my concern is that the top 1% are not going to buy into this.
Okay, so the top 1% of households in New York City are people who earn over $1 million a year annually. So those are the top 1%. People who earn over $1 million annually are the only people that would spend more money in taxes on Mamdani's plan. On his plan, somebody who earns $1 million a year would pay $20,000 a year in additional city tax.
And how do you think they feel about that?
I'm sure they're upset, but again, this is 34,000 households in New York City.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't know how many people live in New York City. I would make a fool of myself guessing here, but if redistributing some of this money from the wealthiest people into people who literally can't afford to put food on the table isn't the answer, I'm curious to what is.
Well, it has to be the answer, and I will grant you that. But the problem is that in this particular situation, we're talking about one city where people can choose to leave said one city, and then the money's going. Let me give you an example. Here's why I 100% agree with you. So I read a stat that 13% of the United States saves. They invest in the stock market. They produce money in the stock market. Then somewhere like 37% live close to paycheck. The bottom 50% are in debt. Obviously, there's a huge problem there. Obviously, there's a huge divide there. But the problem is you give the top 1% in New York City free rein to move other places in the country, like Florida, Texas. They're probably going to do that if they feel that they're not being treated justly. That's just my opinion. Now, I know that we disagree on that. Let's assume that he's able to get buy-in, and let's assume he's able to get everybody on board. What is he planning on? What changes is he planning on doing?
You mean like with the money that he's bringing in?
Yes.
I'm glad you asked that because he has a whole outline of his plan here. He essentially wants to address all the issues. Again, he's looking at New York City here. A lot of in these debates, people try to get him off track. I saw a clip where they asked all the candidates, where's your first trip? Everybody said Israel.
I saw that.
He said, I'm not going to Israel. I'm worried about New York City. So obviously, we talk about healthcare and all these things. They're specific to the people that elected him. This is specific to New York City. So he wants to raise $10 billion. And how he's going to do that is kind of how we outlined is his plan. The corporate tax rate increase, he wants to raise it to 11.5%, which is the same rate as New Jersey, by the way. Would raise $5 billion a year. And adding a 2% New York City income tax for anyone making more than $1 million a year raises $4 billion a year. He has some other things to raise the other billion. I know that he wants to make public transportation cheap or free. He wants to bring down the price of groceries. And he also wants to stabilize rent. Right now, I believe the rent increases on the rent stabilized properties are, if you sign a 1-year lease, it's different than if you sign a 2-year lease. I believe it's something like 3% and 4.2% increases respectively, but don't quote me on that. But he wants to also freeze to make it so you can't increase the rent on the rent stabilized places, at least for the next couple of years.
That's interesting. My concern is that if you're going to do that, what's going to stop an owner from, shutting that down and trying to open up places that he can rent out in a different city?
Because New York City he's free to do that. Go for it. And in these rents, it's not like they're asking people to pay $300 a month in rent. Most of these rent stabilized apartments are still thousands of dollars.
That I completely understand. And I understand that real estate value is much higher in New York City, especially.
Yeah. And there's certain qualifications to where if you have to have a dwelling with so many apartments, it's not just, you can't just say, oh, here's somebody who has a house in New York City. Like this is going to be rent stabilized. It has to fall in a bunch of different criteria.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think he's trying to do specifically for healthcare?
So interesting that you asked that, because how much control does the mayor have of healthcare? Really not a lot. Yeah. But what he's focusing on is he wants to focus on connecting with the community and helping people identify programs that not only they qualify for, but they need, and connecting them with those resources. He wants to spend energy and money on connecting people with the resources that they need.
And from what my understanding is that his big slogan has been healthcare should be a public good, not a commodity. And to be honest, I think that's completely fair. I'm not disagreeing with that. I'm not disagreeing with the fact that the big beautiful bill took away $10 trillion from Medicaid is a good thing. And then, we're funneling that money, or not that money specifically. They won't tell you specifically, but then we're funneling other money to foreign wars. I think that's absolutely ridiculous. But I think the way that he's proposing it is incorrect. From my understanding is he wants the government to be in charge of essentially providing your insurance. So essentially everybody's going to have Medicare throughout the whole population. Do I have that correct?
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know Mamdani's policies, front to back, because I'm not voting for him. The reason that I like Mamdani is because he's aligned himself essentially saying, I'm not going to stand for corruption. I'm going to listen to the people, and I'm going to do what they want me to do.
And I think that's fantastic. I am all for that. And I do believe he's diagnosing some of these problems correctly. I do agree that the housing prices are unaffordable in our country. I do agree that the grocery prices for the average American are unaffordable. I do agree that public transportation should be improved. I do agree that healthcare should be more accessible. What my concern is that his ideal solution is not going to produce the results that we want. What we have to do is we have to create a system where there is still competition. We have to create a system where we still bring out the best in people to provide the best product. Because if we don't, we're going to get mediocre products. Let me tell you what I mean. And specifically when it comes to healthcare, I don't think that we can just have one statewide health plan. I think that there has to be multiple different options. I think there has to be a statewide health plan for everybody to have available. It's easy, accessible, and affordable. Because I do agree that healthcare is a right. It's not a privilege. It's a right. That's my opinion. Other physicians maybe get really upset about that. But we still need to have other private payers. We still need to have the capitalistic effect where we bring out the competition. What we have right now is essentially a quasi version of what he's proposing. Let me explain what I mean. We have the big three conglomerates, like we talked about before on previous episodes. We have parent companies that own the top three insurance companies. as well as the PBMs, as well as the pharmacies. There's really only three main options out there. There's United Health, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and Cigna. What I'm saying is we need to tear down those monopolistic giants. That part I agree with him, but we don't give that money over to the state. We've seen what the government does when they're in control of things. They don't do a good job. They cannot balance a budget. They've only balanced the budget once over the past 50 years. They have been shown that they're going to take the money and put it to the people that are paying them directly. We've seen it in the case of Israel. We've seen it in the case of the Ukraine war. So my concern is that, yes, we need to find a middle ground here. We need to break down the monopoly that's currently taking advantage of people. We went over that extensively, but we can't just have one state government policy because I don't trust the government.
And all that is completely fair. I think, again, to be fair, his healthcare policies are really centered around just New York City. So asking him to develop an entire policy on how to change federal healthcare and healthcare as a whole in the United States, I think is a different conversation. And to be honest, I'd still love to hear what he has to say about this. Now, I will say that everything you described to me is capitalism. And when capitalism runs wild without guardrails, you lead to things like monopolies and vertical integration. So you need some sort of guardrails on capitalism, and some people call those guardrails socialism. I will say, as far as, what's preventing these companies from getting up and leaving, well, let's talk about some corporate profits here. So corporate profits across the board are up 80% since COVID. Okay? Now, Trump cut the corporate tax rate by 14% in his first term. It went from 35 to 21%, the lowest since 1930. Okay? What happened around 1930?
The Great Depression.
Right. Okay. So this cut is estimated to cost the government $1 trillion. Okay? Now, New York State's corporate tax has fallen from 12% in 1970, 10% in 1990, and now it's 7.25%, lower than all the neighboring states. So I think bringing that just back the other direction a little bit isn't a totally unrealistic thing. When you talk about where are you going to get the money for all this stuff, let's just swing the pendulum back a little bit. Let's maybe not have corporate tax at the lowest they've been in 100 years. Maybe let's tax the rich people, not just the rich, the extremely wealthy, because we're not talking about somebody that makes $500,000 a year. Some physicians that make $700,000. You're not even being touched. Okay, this is people that make $1 million a year or more. And I don't say they don't deserve it. I understand. But when everybody else is struggling and wealth is accumulating at the top, you have to make some sort of things that's going to divide up that wealth. And in my opinion, bringing these taxes really just a tiny bit back to somewhat reasonable. I mean, cutting 35 to 21% for the corporate tax rate that's a huge, huge, huge cut.
I don't disagree with you. Clearly, we have a problem because, like we just outlined as well, the top 1% hold 93% of the wealth in the United States. That's not reasonable. We need to fix that. If that keeps going, the divide is only going to grow further and further and further, and we're going to become, more and more torn apart. There's no question about that. My concern is that when we take this money that we do tax them on, what exactly are we doing with it? Are we going to reinvest the money into the system that is going to be funded simply by the government? Or are we going to invest that money, tear down the monopolies, and essentially put laws into place to prevent monopolies from happening, which, by the way, I thought we already did, but apparently, you can still get around some of these things to protect the people from being essentially taken advantage of and only having limited options. I feel that the second way is the most appropriate because I don't trust the government to do things in the appropriate fashion. The last thing I want is a grocery store run by the government. I don't want a government worker picking my blueberries and picking my strawberries and cutting my meat. I don't trust that. A perfect example is, you look at the VA system. The VA system, this is nothing against the VA doctors. I think they do a wonderful job. They have very complex patients. But we clearly see that their system is much more inefficient than the one that we have currently in place. And the one we have currently in place doesn't do a great job. So that is my concern. My concern is that I don't want the government to be in control of these certain goods. I want them to essentially put guardrails in place to prevent the people from being taken advantage of.
And I think that's That's fair. But I mean, food prices are totally out of control right
They're
now.
totally out of control.
I mean, most people would tell you that the cost of groceries is going up way faster than their income. So people are being squeezed so hard just to be able to feed their families. And on top of that, now with the government shutdown, people's benefits like SNAP are being threatened. And that's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah.
But sure, I can understand why that looks scary on paper. But I've said before that I think government, in our society, government's here to solve the problems that the public sector can't solve. And not everything is profitable. And in times where people are choosing, do I pay the rent? Do I pay for my groceries? Do I pay for my medicine? I think we're at a point where if government has to take control because things have gotten totally out of hand, then it is what it is. Like we're at a place here because that way didn't work.
And I don't disagree that the government can come in and help out for a period of time. My worry is that we have seen governments, do that and then not relinquish the control back.
Right.
We would have to make certain that stays in place. Because I'm going to be honest, the same party that, Mamdani ran against, the same party that Mamdani defeated, because let's be honest, that's what he did. He defeated the established Democratic Party. No question about it. That same party that, let's say one day he becomes popular enough to run president for, that same party is going to be essentially trying to establish the same goals that he has. And that's what scares me, except they will want to continue it indefinitely. In my opinion, the established Democratic Party wants only one insurance for everybody to have a healthcare fund. They want to control all of the public supplies like food, transportation. They want to be in control of those things because one, they can make more profit out of it, and two, they can decide where the money goes.
It's interesting that's how you kind of to land on this. So in my opinion, the number one issue in politics is lobbying. Would you agree or disagree?
I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so it's hard because of lobbying groups. There's a million lobbying groups. You can't even always tell like what BlackRock is donating to because they're like probably in 30 lobbying groups.
They hide it beautifully.
So the only way to distance yourself from that, which you and I both agree is the biggest problem in politics, is to go with somebody who removes themselves from that whole system.
And he has so far.
Yes.
He has so far.
So how many other people have done that? And I don't know. I know Bernie has. I don't know off the top of my head if anybody on the right has. So my question to you is, how do you differentiate who's corrupt and who isn't in this case? And even on the left, I'm very critical of a ton of Democrats. Like we were talking even before this episode, Cory Booker wouldn't even come out and back Mamdani while he won the primary. It wasn't until he won this election that they're all saying congratulations. So my whole thing is, if you can't tell who's corrupt and who isn't corrupt because there's money everywhere, you go with the people who aren't taking the money. And so we had a quick interruption there, but what I was talking about was, how do you, when it comes to finding out who's corrupt, how do you sift through who is and who isn't when everybody's accepting money, right?
Absolutely.
Because we both have agreed that that's the biggest problem in politics. So hypothetically, who do you vote for? Do you vote for the corrupt guy who aligns with your policies? Or do you vote for the one that you might disagree with on a couple of policies, but you know for a fact is not corrupt?
Listen, you vote for the guy that you may disagree with because you know that he's being genuine, he's being honest. Now, let me respond to what you were saying. I do not believe that the Democratic Party will allow somebody that is this honest to be their nominee for president. We've seen it with Bernie Sanders. He got shut down and
he's an immigrant. He can't be the president anyway. So
I'm about Bernie Sanders.
Oh, I mean, Mamdani can't be president. But yes, you're right.
But that's my example, is that he's unfortunately in the same party that will not allow. They didn't have a primary back in 2024. I do not trust them to even allow somebody to be honest to get to that pinnacle. Say what you want about Donald. Say what you want about him. They at least let him get to the pinnacle. They maybe tried to kill him. I don't know if that was them. I don't know if that was the left. I don't know who that was. But they at least let him get to the pinnacle. The Democrats won't even let somebody that's honest be able to run. They will make sure that that person is bought and paid for to even have a chance in the primary, or they just won't have a primary.
And exactly what you're saying is exactly the beef that a bunch of people on the left have with the Democrats. They feel abandoned by their party for exactly what you're saying. But I'm saying this is a litmus test almost to identify the people in the Democratic Party that are part of the good side, or the people in the party that are part of the other side that you're talking about. Because I completely agree that there are those people that are motivations that are exactly what you speak. I totally agree. And I think that they're holding down good ones. Mm-hmm. This is a good one.
Okay.
And I think that this litmus test, I mean, when you're looking at the people that he's aligned himself with on this transitional team, one of them is Lena Khan. She's the co-chair. She worked for the FTC. In fact, she was the FTC chair in 2021, the youngest chair in history. She took an aggressive stance in reining in corporate power, including when it comes to healthcare. She went after private equity in healthcare. She wants to get rid of non-compete clauses in healthcare. She said it harms labor markets. It limits healthcare providers' employment opportunities. She received about 26,000 comments on this, mostly from healthcare workers. 25,000 were positive.
So all those things are great, but all of those at the end of the day create more competition and go against having the one single insurance platform that Mamdani eventually wants to propose.
I think you're putting, I don't think he wants to propose a single insurance platform. Right now, he's only focused on the people in New York City. I'm just saying he's aligning himself with all these people that think the same way. When you look at all of his transitional team, she's just one example. I mean, there's a list of it's all women actually, but there's a list of women that all are not only, I mean, you talk about the co-chair, the head of the FTC is his co-chair of his transitional team. They're unbelievably overqualified for that position.
Yeah.
But he's aligned himself with somebody who stood against and received a ton of praise from not this, Lena Khan received a ton of praise when she did this, not only from Bernie Sanders, also from your boy, J.D. Vance.
My boy.
Your boy, J.D. Vance. Yes. She said, anti-monopoly as a philosophy and framework really adopts a skeptical posture towards unchecked concentrations of economic power.
Well, you know that I stand firm in the anti-monopoly monopoly camp. And you know that I stand firm that if I can be confident that somebody with honesty and not accepting money could eventually come to the Democratic head of the party, I will vote for them. I do not care if they're Democrat or Republican. I want the best person for our country. But I am not convinced of is what we just talked about earlier. Now, we're like on the same page with things until we aren't. And I'm super happy for this gentleman that he won because it's bringing out conversations that we really haven't had in the United States in quite a while, because it's bringing a different viewpoint finally to light, which unfortunately I think we've only had two different viewpoints for the past 50 years from what I can recall. So with that being said, you know, we appreciate everybody tuning in for our first emergency episode. We're going to try to do more of these as things come along. But do you have anything to add as we close up shop here?
I think it's very telling that we're sitting here in Youngstown, Ohio, talking about the person that was elected, mayor of New York City, and talking about his potential healthcare policies, because I think that this is hopefully the start of a movement in the Democratic Party that will fracture it enough to where they realize we have to get with the people and actually listen to what the people say. And this can be a way to distance themselves from, the Chuck Schumers and the ones that are sitting there that give a bad name to the left.
The George Soros-backed people.
Yes.
Let's just call it for
the ones that you don't like and that I don't like, and that are in positions of power that stand in the way from real change or real reform.
And please, anybody that wants to continue this conversation in the comment section, this is what this is here for. We want to have open conversations. We truly want to be the guardians of medicine, even when Dr. Fossaceca and I disagree. So we're very excited about trying to continue this conversation forward.
Yeah, appreciate you sitting down with me.
All right, my man.
All right, we'll see you guys.
I'm Dr. Joseph Miladore. This is Guardia Di Medicina. We are the guardians of medicine. My goal is to expose corruption, amplify the signal of love, and honor the sacred. This content is brought to you by Youngstown Guardia LLC. All rights reserved. Any reproduction, redistribution, or unauthorized use of this material without written consent is strictly prohibited.
I'm Anthony Fossaceca, PharmD. My mission is to uncover the realities of medicine and bring about discussion of the important issues that are currently flying under the radar. In a time where people are so divided, I want to find common ground and identify true problems rather than being distracted by emotional divides.